Confidence. It's a powerful tool. In the right hands, it builds empires, inspires nations, but in the wrong hands, it can be a weapon. Imagine a teenager, barely old enough to drive. Imagine him walking into a bank with the swagger of a seasoned executive. Imagine him stepping onto an airplane, not as a passenger, dressed in the crisp uniform of a pilot, commanding respect he hasn't earned. Imagine him donning a stethoscope, advising patients, or arguing cases in a courtroom, all before his 21st birthday. This isn't fiction. This is the story, or at least part of the story, of Frank William Abagnale Jr., a young man who allegedly conned his way across continents. He left a trail of forged checks. How did a boy, running away from a broken home, manage to orchestrate scams worth millions of dollars and stay one step ahead of the FBI? The story often begins around 1964. Frank Abagnale Jr. is just 16 years old. His parents' marriage is dissolving. Faced with choosing which parent to live with in court, Frank makes a different choice altogether. He runs, alone in New York City, with little money. Desperation quickly sets in. Early attempts at low-wage jobs fail because of his age. He realizes that perception is everything. If he looked older, perhaps he could be older. He alters his driver's license, adds a decade to his life. It works. But the paychecks are still meager. Survival demanded more ingenuity. His first real foray into crime was deceptively simple, born from observing his father. Frank had used his father's gas card to buy tires and batteries. Then, he convinced the station attendants to give him cash back, leaving his father with the bill. It was a small-time betrayal, but it planted a seed. Alone in the city, that seed began to grow. He noticed the power of paper, specifically, the power of checks. Frank started by opening bank accounts, writing checks for more than his balance, moving on before they bounced. This is check kiting, a basic form of fraud. But Frank refined it. He learned the intricacies of the banking system of the time. He noticed tellers often looked more at the person presenting the check than the check itself. Confidence, he learned, was his currency. He started printing his own checks, mimicking legitimate ones with painstaking detail. He learned about routing numbers, magnetic ink, the subtle weight of quality paper. He'd print checks from fictional companies, or, more daringly, impersonate real businesses. He'd deposit a fake check, then withdraw most of it in cash before the bank realized the deposit was worthless. He repeated this, bank after bank, city after city. But simply cashing bad checks wasn't enough. Frank craved not just money, but legitimacy, or at least, the appearance of it. The story goes that one day, seeing pilots walking through a hotel lobby, radiating authority and glamour, Frank had an epiphany. Who would question a pilot? He allegedly called Pan American World Airways' corporate office, Pan Am. Pretending to be a student researching a story, he gathered information, uniforms, airline procedures. Armed with this knowledge and his innate charm, he convinced a manufacturer to tailor an authentic Pan Am pilot uniform for him. Suddenly, doors opened. Banks cashed his fraudulent payroll checks without blinking. According to Abagnale's famous account, he discovered the practice of deadheading, pilots hitching free rides in the cockpit jump seats of other airlines. He claims he logged over 1 million miles, flying to dozens of countries, all without a pilot's license, simply by looking the part and knowing the lingo. He never actually flew a plane, he just rode along. The life of a globe-trotting pilot eventually drew too much heat. Close calls became more frequent. So, Frank needed a new identity. He relocated to Georgia. There, on an apartment application, he impulsively listed his former occupation, doctor. This lie took on a life of its own. He befriended a real doctor in his building. Impressed by Frank's apparent intelligence, the doctor helped him secure a role supervising resident interns at a local hospital. As Dr. Frank Connors, he reportedly managed to bluff his way through the job for nearly a year. He relied on the interns to handle actual medical emergencies. He focused on paperwork, adopted medical jargon. The risk, however, was enormous. A single mistake could have fatal consequences. Realizing he was dangerously out of his depth, he quietly slipped away. Next came the law. Settling briefly in Louisiana, Abagnale claimed he forged a Harvard Law transcript. After reportedly failing the bar exam twice, he actually passed it on his third attempt. This supposed credential landed him a job in the Louisiana State Attorney General's office. For months, Robert Black, attorney at law, pushed papers, fetched coffee, avoided any actual legal work, until a genuinely Harvard-educated colleague began asking probing questions. The charade was crumbling again. It was time to disappear. Throughout these years, Frank Abagnale wasn't just changing costumes. He was constantly refining his check fraud techniques. He became a master forger, understanding the psychology of trust and the loopholes in security. He allegedly stole identities, created sophisticated fake payroll checks, exploited the slow communication between banks, across state lines and international borders. By his own estimation, he cashed millions of dollars in bad checks across dozens of countries. He lived lavishly, always moving, always looking over his shoulder. But the law was catching up. The FBI, specifically an agent often identified as Carl Hanratty in popular accounts, though the real agent's identity is debated, was piecing together the puzzle. Abagnale narrowly escaped capture several times, relying on quick thinking, his chameleon-like ability to blend in. His luck finally ran out. In 1969, at the age of 21, accounts vary slightly, but the most common story places his capture in Montpellier, France. An Air France employee, a former girlfriend, recognized his face on a wanted poster. She alerted the authorities. Another account suggests a suspicious reverend in Baton Rouge tipped off police earlier that year, after Frank claimed to be a TWA pilot. Regardless of the precise trigger, the international chase was over. What followed was grim. Abagnale served time in France's Perpignan prison, a notoriously harsh facility, for about 6 months. Then he endured another 6 months in Sweden. Finally, he was extradited to the United States to face federal charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Even incarcerated, his escape artistry allegedly continued. Claims of at least 2 escape attempts, including one where he supposedly impersonated a prison inspector. After serving about 4 or 5 years of his sentence, the U.S. federal government reportedly offered him a deal. His unique expertise in forgery and fraud was undeniable. They proposed releasing him early, on the condition that he would assist federal authorities, particularly the FBI, in understanding and combating white-collar crime, especially check fraud. Frank Abagnale agreed. Now, it's essential to inject a dose of reality here. While the core of Abagnale's story, the extensive check fraud, the international pursuit, the arrests, time served, is well documented, many of the more sensational details have been questioned, particularly the specifics and duration of his impersonations as a pilot, doctor, and lawyer. These have been seriously challenged, in some cases refuted. Journalistic investigations, accounts from people involved during that period, suggest significant exaggeration, perhaps fabrication. In his popular autobiography, Catch Me If You Can, Abagnale himself admitted in 2002 that parts of his story were over-dramatized. Some sources even dispute the nature and extent of his work for the FBI, suggesting it was less formal than often portrayed. Officials from institutions he claimed to have infiltrated have sometimes stated they have no record of him, or that the events described couldn't have happened as claimed. So, was he truly the criminal mastermind depicted in film? Or was he primarily a prolific check forger who embellished his exploits for notoriety and a second career? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. He was a remarkably successful con artist during his teenage years. He did defraud banks of a significant amount of money. He was pursued and captured internationally, and he did transition into a respected authority on fraud prevention. After his release, Abagnale struggled initially. Finding legitimate work was difficult due to his criminal record. Eventually, he leveraged his past. He approached a bank, offered to speak to their staff about fraud methods. He promised that if they didn't find his insights valuable, they owed him nothing. They were impressed. This marked the beginning of Abagnale and Associates, his security consulting firm. For decades, he has advised corporations, financial institutions, and government agencies, including the FBI Academy, on detecting and preventing the very types of scams he once perfected. He credits meeting his wife, starting a family, with fundamentally changing his path, providing the stability and motivation to live honestly. He speaks often about ethics, redemption, using one's skills for good. The story of Frank Abagnale Jr. remains captivating. It's a reminder of how easily appearances can be manipulated, how readily we trust the uniforms, the titles that signify authority. Whether every detail of his youthful escapades is factual or embellished, the core narrative is undeniable. A teenager, armed with audacity and intelligence, ran circles around the systems designed to stop him. He left behind a legacy that is part cautionary tale, part unbelievable adventure. His later life, dedicated to preventing the crimes he once committed, adds a final, complex layer to the story of the world's most famous teenage con man.